Introduction. View of the initial situation, 1808 to 1813. The initial situation for our consideration of the problem of the partisan is the guerrilla war that the Spanish people waged against the army of a foreign conqueror from 1808 until 1813. In this war, a people, a pre-bourgeois, pre-industrial, pre-conventional nation, for the first time confronted a modern, well-organized, regular army that had evolved from the experiences of the French Revolution. Thereby, new horizons of war opened, new concepts of war developed, and a new theory of war and politics emerged. The partisan fights irregularly, but the difference between regular and irregular battle depends on the precision of the regular and finds its concrete antithesis and thereby its concept only in modern forms of organization, which originated in the wars of the French Revolution. During all ages of humanity and its many wars and battles, there have been rules of war and battle, and thus also transgression and disregard of those rules. In particular, during times of dissolution, e.g. the 30 Years' War on German soil, 1618 to 48, and all civil and colonial wars in world history, there have been recurring phenomena that can be called partisan. Yet, for a complete theory of the partisan, it is important to recognize that the power and significance of his irregularity has been dependent on the power and significance of the regularity that he challenges. Precisely this regularity of the state as well as of the army obtained a new exact resolution in the French state as well as in the French army through Napoleon. The countless Indian wars of the white conquerors against the American Redskins from the 17th to the 19th century, as well as the methods of the riflemen in the American War of Independence against the regular English army, 1774 to 83, and the Civil War in the Vendée between Chouans and Jacobins, 1793 to 96, all still being to the pre-Napoleonic stage. The new art of war of Napoleon's regular army originated in the new, revolutionary form of battle. A Prussian officer from that time saw Napoleon's whole campaign against Prussia in 1806 as merely partisan warfare on a grand scale. The partisan of the Spanish guerrilla war of 1808 was the first who dared to fight irregularly against the first modern regular army. Napoleon had defeated the regular Spanish army in the fall of 1808. The actual Spanish guerrilla war began only after this defeat of the regular army. There is not yet a complete documented history of the Spanish partisan war. This history, as Fernando Solano Costa has observed, is necessary but also very difficult because the entire Spanish guerrilla war consisted of nearly 200 small regional wars in Asturias, Aragon, Catalonia, Navarra, Castile, etc., under the leadership of numerous fighters whose names are shrouded in many myths and legends. One of them, Juan Martín Díaz, known as Empecinado, became the terror of the French and made the road from Madrid to Saragossa unsafe. This partisan war was waged on both sides with the utmost cruelty, and it is no wonder that more historical materials, books, and memoirs have been published by the educated afrancesados, friends of the French, than by the guerrillas. But as always, myths and legends on the one hand and documented history on the other may be complementary. In any case, the lines of our initial situation are clear. According to Clausewitz, half of the entire French army often was posted in Spain, and half of this number, namely 250 to 260,000 men, were engaged with the guerrillas, whose number has been estimated by Gomez de Artes at 50,000 and by others as being much lower. Primarily important in the situation of the Spanish partisan in 1808 was the fact that he risked battle on his own home soil, while the king and his family were not yet able to tell exactly who was the real enemy. In this respect, the legitimate authority in Spain did not act differently from the one in Germany. Another feature of the Spanish situation was that the educated strata of the nobility The high clergy and the bourgeois were mostly afrancedados, i.e., they sympathized with the foreign conqueror. Also, in this respect, there are parallels with Germany, where the great German poet Goethe wrote hymns to Napoleon's glory, and the German-educated elite never was certain about where it belonged. In Spain, the guerrilla dared the hopeless fight. He was, a poor devil, the first typical case of the irregular cannon fodder of global political conflicts. All of this is part of an overture to a theory of the partisan. At that time, a spark jumped from Spain to the north. It did not ignite the same fire that gave the Spanish guerrilla war its world historical significance, but it produced an effect whose continuation today, in the second half of the 20th century, changes the face of the earth and her humanity. It brought about a theory of war and enmity that logically culminates in the theory of the partisan. At first, in 1809, during the short war waged by the Austro-Hungarian Empire against Napoleon, a systematic attempt was made to emulate the Spanish model. With the help of famous publicists, among them Friedrich Jens and Friedrich Schlegel, the Austrian government in Vienna staged a national propaganda campaign against Napoleon. Spanish writings were disseminated in German. Heinrich von Kleist quickly joined in this anti-French propaganda and continued it in Berlin after this Austrian War of 1809. In these years, until his death in November 1811, he became the real poet of national resistance against the foreign conqueror. His play, Die Hermannschlacht, The Battle of Hermann, is the greatest partisan poem of all times. He also wrote a poem titled An Palafox, to Palafox, and put the defender of Saragossa in the same company as Leonidas, Arminius, and William Tell. The well-known fact that the reformers in the Prussian General Staff, most notably August von Gneisenau and Gerhard von Scharnhorst, were deeply impressed by the Spanish example will be discussed below. The origins of the book On War, through which the name Karl von Clausewitz acquired an almost mythical resonance, also can be found in the world of ideas of these Prussian staff officers from 1808 to 1813. His formula of war as the continuation of politics already contains in a nutshell a theory of the partisan whose logic has been pursued to its end by Lenin and Mao Zedong. The only real guerrilla war of national liberation that should be mentioned in the context of our partisan problem was waged in Tyrol, where Andreas Hofer, Joseph Speckbacher, and the Capuchin friar, Joachim Hoppinger, were active. The Tyroleans became a mighty torch, as Clausewitz put it. However, the 1809 episode ended quickly. There was no partisan warfare against the French and the rest of Germany. The strong national impulse, manifested in individual revolts and raiding parties, ended very quickly and had no time on the course of regular war. The conflicts of spring and summer 1813 took place on the battlefield, and the decisive blow was struck in a pitched battle near Leipzig in October 1813. In the course of a general restoration, the Congress of Vienna, 1814 through 15, also reestablished the concepts of European laws of war. This was one of the most remarkable restorations in world history. It was so enormously successful that these laws of war regarded bracketing, i.e. limited, continental land war still dominated the military conduct of European land war during World War I, 1914 through 18. Until today, these laws of war are called classical, and they deserve the name because they recognize clear distinctions, above all between war and peace, combatants and non-combatants, enemy and criminal. War was waged between states, between regular state armies, and between sovereign bearers of a jubilee, right to war, who also in war respected each other as enemies and did not discriminate against each other as criminals, so that a peace treaty was possible and even constituted the normal, self-evident end of war. Given such a classical regularity, as long as it actually held sway, the partisan could be only a marginal phenomena, which in fact he was even during World War I. the horizon of our investigation. If I have occasion to speak about modern theories of the partisan, then I must emphasize that there actually are no old theories of the partisan as distinguished from modern ones. In the classical laws of war of European international law, there was no place for the partisan in the modern sense. He was either, as in the cabinet wars of the 18th century, a lighter, especially more mobile, but nevertheless regular type of troop, or, being a particularly gruesome criminal, he was simply outside the law, or la loi. As long as the notion of a duel with open weapons and chivalry remained in war, this could not have been otherwise. With the introduction of compulsory military service, all wars become, in principle, wars of national liberation, and this soon leads to a situation that is difficult and often even irresolvable for the classical laws of war, such as a more or less improvised levy en masse, mass conscription, or the free corps and the francs-tireurs, which I will discuss later. Fundamentally, in any war, war remains bracketed, and the partisan stands outside of this bracketing. The fact that he stands outside of this bracketing now becomes a matter of his essence and his existence. The modern partisan expects neither law nor mercy from the enemy. He has moved away from the conventional enmity of controlled and bracketed war and into the realm of another real enmity, which intensifies through terror and counter-terror until it ends in extermination. Given the situation of the partisan, two types of war are especially important and in a certain sense even related to it: civil war and colonial war. Today, this context is very specific. Classical European international law pushed both of these dangerous forms of war and enmity to the margins. In the Jus Publicum Europaeum, public law of Europe, war was waged between states, and was war that a regular state army waged against another regular state army. Open civil war was considered to be armed insurrection, which was defeated with the help of a state of siege by police and troops, unless it led to recognition of the rebels as belligerents. Colonial war still remains within the purview of the military science of European nations such as England, France, and Spain, yet this still does not challenge regular state war as the classical model. Here, Russia in particular must be mentioned. During the entire 19th century, the Russian army waged many wars against Asiatic mountain peoples and never restricted itself exclusively to regular army wars, as did the Prussian-German army. Furthermore, the Otto-Chthonist partisan war against Napoleon's army in part of Russian history. In the summer of 1812, Russian partisans under military leadership harassed the French army in its advance on Moscow. In fall and winter of the same year, Russian peasants killed the cold and hungry French army in its retreat. All of this did not last much longer than half a year, but it sufficed to become an historical event of great import, admittedly more through its political myth and its different interpretations than through its paradigmatic impact on the theoretical science of war. Here we must mention at least two different, even conflicting interpretations of the Russian partisan war of 1812. An anarchistic one based on Michael Bakunin and Peter Kropotkin, which became famous in Leo Tolstoy's novel War and Peace, and the Bolshevik utilization in Stalin's tactics and strategy of revolutionary war. Tolstoy was not an anarchist like Bakunin or Kropotkin, but his literary influence was much greater. His epic, War and Peace, contains more myth-building power than any political doctrine or any documented history. Tolstoy elevated the Russian partisans of 1812 to bearers of the elemental powers of the Russian earth, which shook off the famous Emperor Napoleon and his splendid army like some onerous vermin. For Tolstoy, the uneducated, illiterate peasant not only is stronger, but also more intelligent than all strategists and tacticians. Above all, he is more intelligent than the great General Napoleon, who becomes a puppet in the hands of historical events. During World War II, Stalin adopted this myth of the indigenous, national partisan against Germany, and put it very concretely into the service of his communist world politics. This constituted an essentially new stage of partisan warfare, which began with Mao Zedong. For 30 years, partisan warfare had been pursued in many parts of the earth. It began in 1927, before World War II, in China and other Asiatic countries, which later defended themselves against the Japanese invasion from 1932 to 45. During World War II, Russia, Poland, and Balkans, France, Albania, Greece, and other countries became theaters of this type of warfare. After World War II, partisan warfare continued in Indochina, where the Vietnamese communist leader Ho Chi Minh and the victor of Dien Bien Phu, General Vo Nguyen Giap, organized it with particular effect against the French colonial army. Moreover, partisan warfare continued in Malaya, the Philippines, Algeria, Cyprus under George Grivas, and Cuba under Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. At present, in 1962, the Indo-Chinese countries of Laos and Vietnam are theaters of partisan warfare, which daily develops new methods of overpowering and outwitting the enemy. Modern technology provides ever stronger weapons and means of destruction, ever more perfected means of transportation and methods of communication for the partisans, as well as for the regular troops who fight them. In the vicious circle of terror and counter-terror, combat against partisans is often only a mirror image of partisan warfare, and time and again, the correctness of the old adage, usually cited as Napoleon's order to General Lefebvre on September 12, 1813, proves to be true. In fighting the partisan anywhere, one must fight like a partisan. Il faut opérer en partisan partout où il y a des partisans. Some particular questions regarding norms in jurisprudence and international law will be elaborated below. The fundamentals are self-evident. The application to rapidly developing concrete situations is controversial. In recent years, an impressive document of the will to total resistance, and not only the will but also detailed orders for its concrete execution, has appeared. The Swiss Everyman's Guide to Guerrilla Warfare, published by the Swiss Association of Non-Commissioned Officers, in 180 pages, it offers instructions for passive and active resistance against a foreign invasion, with detailed suggestions for sabotage, going underground, concealing weapons, surprise attacks, combating spies, etc. The experience of the last decades are utilized scrupulously. This Everyman's Modern War Guide begins with the remark that resistance to the end must adhere to the 1907 Hague Convention respecting the laws and customs of war on land and to the 1949 Geneva Conventions. This goes without saying. It is also not difficult to calculate how a normal, regular army would react to the practical application of these directions for guerrilla warfare, e.g., silent killing of guards by hitting them with an axe, as long as it did not feel it had been defeated.